the surprise of basically everyone, the new Guilty Gear Strive mode Team of 3 is completely out for everyone to play. This did come out of basically nowhere, considering the second beta was literally a week ago. But with massive sweeping changes to the pre-game and only minor changes to the actual gameplay side, we have some really interesting things to talk about. So, let's talk about Guilty Gear Strive Team of 3. Just call it 3v3, like what? The biggest change to the game mode is that there are now several different classes that you can choose from before you even get into the game. In fact, you're able to choose a lot of different things about your character before going in. You essentially get to make your own little build before even entering the match. You can choose your class, your assist skills, and your equipment. That's 3 major choices that you gotta make. So how about we go through and talk about what each one of them actually is. There are 5 separate classes that you can choose from, and all of them come with their own unique quirks and affect your stats in different ways. Yes, you have stats now. This is an RPG. Please choose which action you would like to do on your turn. Vanguard is the first class that the game presents you with and is the primary combat class. This class is the only one that is able to get buffs to actual stats that affect gameplay. This being damage, defense, burst generation, and tension generation. They are the most in-depth class with the most variety that you can make in their build with the equipment, which we'll get onto later. If you want to actually press buttons and play the fighting game, you're gonna want to play Vanguard. Blaster is a backline class which focuses primarily on using offensive abilities in order to disrupt the opponent. These are attacks that generally just do a bunch of damage to the opponent or cause a large disruption in some way, like Faust Bomb, Fire Carpet, the weird grenade thing, those kind of abilities. On the flip side of this, Raider uses defensive abilities from the backline in order to disrupt the opponent. These are attacks that are mostly focused on either getting the opponent off of you or making it harder for you to actually approach the opponent. Medic is pretty self-explanatory. It's a healer. It's based on making sure that you heal the damage that you take and also a little bit of preventing damage with their shields. And finally, Synergist is focused on buffing the point character in a variety of different ways. These are things like giving them lifesteal to their attacks, giving them poison, making them do more chip, stuff like that. As you can see, most of these classes are aimed at making the assist role more interesting by allowing you to choose what kind of assist you are. It does give the ability for pre-made groups to actually create functioning team compositions beyond just what characters they're playing. For example, you could pair a tanky character with 2 healers and create a literal wall that you need to pass through. You can use the Synergist to buff the Vanguard and have the Blaster add on the pressure while that's happening, or a Raider to keep the opponent off of you while you start zoning. This also adds variety when playing solo. Since the game auto-fills you into a team, you have to find a way to adjust around your new teammates and what builds they're taking. The biggest criticism I have of the class system, though, is that there's only one offensive class. Vanguard is fun, but at least this awkward situation with the switching mechanic is less emphasized because you have one person with all the big stats, and they're basically the only person who can take the front line. I'll loop back around to that later, though. I'm getting ahead of myself. Next, we need to talk about the skill selection. If you play the first beta, you'll be familiar with these. These are basically the items and abilities that you can throw out while you're in the backline. You need to make sure that you have enough resource gauge, as well as the ability being off of cooldown to make sure that you can use it. The biggest change to this system, aside from being able to pick your own skills, is that now skills take way longer to become active when compared to the original beta. In beta 1, they would come off cooldown extremely quickly, and you would basically be able to spam them the moment you were able to use them. Now that the cooldown timer has been increased massively to the point where it actually takes a good amount of time for any skill to activate, you'll basically always get your resource gauge maxed out before you can actually use a skill. Meaning, if you want to act immediately, you have to use your assist. I like this change, in the sense that it makes the game mode just that little bit less chaotic. But it does lead to this awkward problem where sometimes as the assist player, you're forced to do literally nothing. And I'm not a personal fan of that. Finally, we have your equipment. This is a system where you can equip different skills and they give you different effects based on your class. They're also basically the only way to affect your stats in any meaningful way. This is where most of your build variety is going to come in, since some of these buffs are a little funky. But this leads to my biggest problem with the system. Most of the interesting builds only work on Vanguard. Taking these items as equipment on other classes can give buffs which are useful, but not as interesting. Generally, they're just bigger stat buffs that lead to stronger resource generation or more potential damage and healing. It feels like one side of the equation is much cooler than the other side, at least from my monkey rush down perspective. I've tried both sides and I definitely understand the thrill of helping your teammates out with a well-timed assist or skill. However, would you rather be the one in the back sending out bottles of guacamole gamerfart that you can get from gamersubs.gg using code He'sGecko for 10% off any order on the site? Or would you want to be the one fucking the opponent's shit up? The balancing between playing as a support and playing as the main player is striking, and personally for me, playing as a support is just nowhere near as fun. Conceptually, the different supports have more variety than the Vanguard builds do. However, playing them ends up boiling down to the same type of gameplay. Just waiting for the bar to fill and the cooldowns to finish so that you can press one button and go back to waiting. It's disappointing to say the least, especially considering how the tag systems are designed. It feels like these classes disincentivize you from actually switching between the different players on your team because they won't be able to hold their own as well as your Vanguard player does. Their combat stats are literally just worse. This is further emphasized by Vanguards getting buffs from their equipment that help them directly in combat, whereas the other classes' buffs just help them do the assist actions better. I understand that Arxis wants you to have variety in the way that you support your teammates, but disincentivizing the ability of tagging out to one of your allies doesn't feel like a good way to do that. When I know someone in my backline isn't also playing Vanguard, I don't want to tag into them, which is my favorite part of the game mode. Beating the shit out of the opponent alongside your buddy was the appeal of the game mode, to me at least. And to know that if I were to switch my partner in, I'd be putting us both at a statistical disadvantage feels like shit. It leads to this situation where I see someone in the backline call for a tag that would be pretty good based on the character I'm fighting or the situation I'm in, and I don't want to do it because their attack stat is bad. I think giving some of the support classes actual combat stats would have been a good way to fix this. Blaster and Raider are supposed to be the offensive and defensive support types. However, their roles completely dissipate the moment that they're tagged in. I think having them have a large amount of their corresponding stat would have helped with this. Blaster is supposed to disrupt the opponent by doing damaging offensive spells, so why not also have them have a high attack stat, but a low defensive stat, meaning switching into them is an opportunity for you to do a bunch of damage to the opponent by completely dropping your Vanguard's defense. Alternatively, Raider is the defensive variation of this, so have them have a high defensive stat, thus allowing them to act as a wall that protects the team and gives them breathing room to build up resources and plan out a counterattack. You can only switch to one person per round anyway, so it wouldn't absolutely destroy the balance of the game by having people constantly switch in their Raiders and then their Blasters and then going back to their Raiders. It would just be a nice option for people in the backline if they want to jump in. Vanguards already have builds where they have a shit ton of offense and basically no defense, so what's wrong with giving that static build to one of the backline classes? Hell, it could cause Vanguards to actually think about their builds more. I'm not saying that the Raiders and the Blasters should be able to get lifesteal on their attacks or be able to do a bunch of crazy stuff like Vanguard could. Just give them stats so that when they go in, it doesn't feel like a waste. There's also a system in which your items level up the more times that you use them in a fight, which is a weird system, and I've not played enough of the game to actually properly interact with it. It's probably a fun progression system, but if I'm to be 100% honest, I don't want to play thousands of games of this mode, so I have no idea if it breaks the game in half or not. This leads us to the important question that we need to answer though. Is the game mode fun? Yeah, with an asterisk. If you're playing with friends and people you know making wacky builds and planning out dumb strategies, it can be extremely fun. But I feel like it relies too much on actually playing with friends to make the game mode fun. When I'm playing in a team, I wonder if I'm having fun because I'm playing a game with my friends, or if the game is the fun. I know that's a bit of a weird criticism, but I come to fighting games because I enjoy playing them as they are. The feeling of beating someone with a new technique that I learned, or figuring out a way to counter their game plan, is the main reason that I come to these games. It could be a rival that I've fought in hundreds of different matches across dozens of different fighting games, or a random person in tower. It doesn't matter because I can get this experience from both of them, and it's that experience that keeps me coming back. 3v3 does have the potential for this kind of thing. However, it unfortunately doesn't scratch that same itch that I come to fighting games for. It's a different kind of fun. It is still fun, but it's fun when with friends. The only time I get anything close to scratching that itch is when I'm playing with 3 people and we try to figure out how the other team is actually building their team. If I'm playing with randoms, it's just not as good. On a personal note, I don't like builds. I think the build system is pretty unique and actually pretty cool. It's probably the best execution of this I've ever seen in a fighting game, but, well, I've also not seen a lot of executions of this in a fighting game. However, I'm not a fan of losing because my opponent's build was better than mine. Fighting games are one of the most micro-intensive genres that you can play. Most situations in fighting games have to be dealt with right there and then. Making a build, making a team comp, planning out a game plan is much more of a macro decision. It's a much bigger thing that you do outside of the game. And to me, it's less interesting and less fun. It's why I don't play games like League of Legends. I don't like making builds. I don't like planning out giant strategies. I like hitting my opponent in the face really hard. For people who enjoy that type of gameplay, it's definitely a good addition. I think it could genuinely be some people's favorite game mode thanks to the build variety now. But for me personally, it doesn't hit the same marks as actual Guilty Gear. But does that make it bad? No, of course not. As a casual-centric game mode, there is a lot of fun to be had here, especially if you're playing with friends. And Arxis is very obviously leaning into that angle. I just worry with the way the progression works that getting into the game later is going to be hard, especially if other people's abilities are just better than yours. But it's unfortunately just not for me. I like the idea of 3v3, but it was never something that I was going to fully dive into. It's a fun game mode, if you have friends. But it's not breaking any new grounds, and I highly doubt people will be flocking to the game just for 3v3. Anyway, on that slightly bummer note, I'm playing Strive in the Park right now on Twitch. Come join. Here's the Patreon read. I have a patron. Every time I mention this, people are like, what, Gecko, you have a patron? I have a Patreon. Go to it now. Sub £1 a month. It's very good.
As always, a very special thanks to 64 MHz, Almost Nap Time, Axolotl Syndicate, Daniel Wiederix, Edison Luttery, Fexo, FL Maxlet, Games.png, Haywire Nova Leap, Hoffmeister Bear, I Am Naoto, It's Riley, Knife and Spoon, Criticat MP04, Mr. Glenn, Nubus, Ray W, Sergeant Clubby, Slimy Gal 42, Super, Storm SSB, Falcon, Tom Tanks, Velvet Puppy, and Zarndatsu for being Tier 2 patron supporters.
Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next week.